Hi there, happy Easter. I wasn't going to do a video today, but I just thought if Easter's not a good reason to do a video, then I don't know what is. I'm just using my phone sitting on the floor in my office, and I just wanted to share some Easter thoughts with you all. Last night I watched the Jesus Christ Superstar musical on YouTube. Andrew Lloyd Webber is showing his musicals during this kind of lockdown period for free. Every weekend there's a different musical available for 48 hours. And I've always wanted to see that musical. I've never seen it before. And I watched it last night. It was the version that has Tim Minchin and Melanie C and Chris Moyles. And I'd actually wanted to get tickets for that show live, but it never happened. So it was quite nice to be able to actually watch it from the comfort of my home. And I really enjoyed it, but there was a few things that I felt were inaccurately depicted. And most importantly, they missed the most important aspect of the whole story. Now, as I'm assuming people might have guessed by now, I am a Christian. My Christian faith is a really important part of who I am. It has a very important basis on kind of my worldview, and the hope that I have in life. And for me, the Easter story, some of the key components about the Easter story is that that I felt that weren't well represented in that musical. So the musical is based telling the story from Judas's perspective, which I think is a really interesting angle to take in telling the story, and it makes for an interesting story. And there were some really interesting points that they kind of make. But I felt that some of the most significant elements of the Easter story were missed as a result. One is they depicted Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane in turmoil, which we can read in the scriptures that he was in turmoil. But the big difference is, so in the Bible it tells us that Jesus, wept and sweat, like he sweat blood. He was in real anguish, because he knew what was coming, and he wasn't looking forward to it. And he was praying, like, God, if there's any way you can take this cup from me, then do it. And he was. But one thing that I firmly believe is that as much as he was dreading it and just wishing there was a way out, he knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. Whereas in the musical version, it was like he didn't know what the plan was. He didn't know why he was doing it. He didn't know what the point of it was. I think Jesus knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it, and that's why he willingly went and did it, because he knew what he was doing. And what I believe as a Christian he achieved by going and dying on that cross was that he was buying our salvation. The Bible tells us that we've all sinned and we've all fallen short of God's glory. What that basically means is that every one of us has done wrong. Some of us have done obvious things like murdering people, but we've all done things where we've been selfish, we've been cruel, we've been unkind. Every one of us has done things that mean that we've fallen short of the standard. And to be in God's presence, he demands perfection, because God is perfect, God is good, and to be in his presence, then the standard that's required is perfection, and we can't achieve that. We're not perfect, But God wants us in his presence, and so rather than condemning us to being apart from him, he made the way. He paid the price. The price for not being perfect is death. I think that's why we see death in our world. That's why we see suffering. It's, we so often God gets the blame for things, but if you look around, so much of the suffering in the world, even with the coronavirus, is as human race, we have abused the earth, we've abused each other, we've abused ourselves, we've brought death and destruction upon ourselves. But the Easter story says that God wanted to fix that, and he came down in person and died in our place, to restore us, to make us right. Because of what he did, we now can take on that mantle of perfect and good and righteous, and then we can then stand before God. It's like when you have a lamb who's died, and you're trying to get the mother to accept another lamb, and you skin the first one, the dead one, you dress the new lamb in the original lamb's kind of skin. Yeah, we do it sometimes if need be. And then the mother accepts the second lamb because it's wearing the first lamb's skin. That's very similar to what happened with Christ and with us. Because of what Christ did on that cross, we can come and be accepted as God's children. And so Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he went to that cross and died, and he did it because he loves us, and he wanted that so much that he was willing, something that caused him that much anguish, he went and did it anyway. And the biggest element that they missed from the story, which, because they were telling it from Judas's perspective, he wasn't around to see, was Jesus rose from the dead. I'm a firm believer that on the third day Jesus rose again, and that is what gives his story all the power. I mean, he was an amazing man, and I'm a firm believer that there's enough historical evidence to prove he lived, he existed, he walked the earth in his teachings. But he was more than just that. If he was a good teacher, then that's great. He has some incredibly kind of revolutionary ideas about loving others, and sort of selfless living, and ideas that this world desperately needs. But he was more than that, and he didn't just die, he rose again, and in doing so he defeated death, he defeated sin. And there's an old hymn that has been playing on my mind a lot recently with the coronavirus lockdown and everything that's been going on in the world. And it's the old hymn, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. And it's that hope, that is the hope that us Christians have, that even if, we might be scared of dying from coronavirus, and there's many Christians who have, it doesn't make us invincible. Being a Christian doesn't make you invincible to the problems and the trials and the difficult things of this world. But it gives you hope that you know who holds your future, you know who's in control, and that he is good, and that he has a good plan for us, that he loves us, that he went and died for us. And that is just the message I wanted to share with you this Easter morning. Well, it's probably coming up for afternoon, but and just, my God is good, and I understand if people are mad at him. I understand if people are mad at the church, and I really understand if people are mad at religion. People have done a lot of damage over the years in the name of religion and the church, and my invitation to you is to come and meet the risen Jesus. Come and meet my God, and find for yourself that he is good. I've been through some really difficult times in the past. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. I have Crohn's disease, And it's a challenge to believe in a God who heals when you have a chronic illness. And then I went through an extremely messy divorce. And my entire world was pulled apart, pulled out from underneath my feet. And in my most broken, my God was there, and he was present, and he met all of my needs. And he has made promises to me, and he has kept those promises. And I just want to just say this Easter that my God is a God who has a plan, and if he has made you promises, he will keep them. He is faithful. God is faithful and just, and anything he said he will do, he will do. So if God has made you promises and then coronavirus has happened or anything else has happened, if there's been some upheaval in your life and you think, where have those promises gone, don't lose hope. He is a God of promises. The disciples would have thought that, where was those promises when he died on that cross? They must have been going, but he said he was gonna do all this stuff, what's going on? But when he rose again on the Sunday, he proved that he's a God who keeps his promises. So if God's made you promises and you're wondering, where have those promises gone? Then I just invite you to just trust in him, that he will be faithful to his promises. He will be faithful to you. And that God does have a plan. He does have a plan for each one of us. He's got a plan for our future. He's got a plan to do us good. Now we get to choose whether we want to walk in that plan or not. But if you choose God's plan for your life, he will look after you. He will. It doesn't mean you won't have bad things happen. It doesn't mean that you won't have heartache and pain. That's part of being human. That's part of the human experience. What it does mean is you will have God present with you through every step of the journey. That he will be there present. He will look after you. He will meet your needs. He will give you everything you need. And yeah, you'll have his comfort and his presence. And I just invite you to, if you don't know that comfort, that presence, that assurance, if you don't know my God, this Easter I invite you to call out to him, ask him. He's a God who answers when we call, and when we seek him, he will be found. I don't know how much I've got left on my phone battery, memory rather, but I just want to share a testimony with you. Back when my marriage was imploding, a piece before that, I ran a marathon before I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and when I got diagnosed, I was told by the doctors, don't do any more marathons. I then lost a friend to cancer, and I felt a really strong urge to run another marathon in her memory to raise money for a cancer charity. And everybody thought I was mad. It was against medical advice, but I had to do it, and I can't explain. I just had to do it. It was something I just needed to do. So I had trained for and prepared for this marathon, and then 3 days before going to run this marathon, my husband sat me down and told me that he had been thinking about leaving me for about a year. I had been thinking that we were doing really well. We'd had problems in the past, but we were doing really well at that point, I thought. And it was completely out of the blue. In truth, it was actually a very unhealthy marriage. It was bad for both of us. But it was emotionally abusive. Looking back now, I can see that, but at the time I couldn't, and it's like I built my entire world around him, and he basically sat me down and told me that if I didn't change and be a better person, then he was gonna leave me. And so I'm going off to run this marathon, which is already a psychological challenge in itself, with this hanging over my head. And I set off, started the marathon. It was, the marathon I ran was a smaller one, kind of a bit more of a rural marathon, so for most of the route there's nobody there, along the route. A large portion of it was done nobody around. You're on your own, especially since I was among the last people to finish. So I started running the marathon. The first 9 miles I was doing well. I was running. I was doing quite well. Then at the 9 mile mark, then I had to stop to be sick, physically sick. Good old Crohn's. When I went to try and start running again, my joints started to hurt, and that's one of the symptoms of Crohn's disease, is joint pain. And my legs, my hips, my knees, my ankles were just agony. I couldn't run anymore. My body just went nope. So I set off walking. The 12 mile mark, I was popping codeine. I was in so much pain. And by the 15 mile mark, the codeine did nothing. By the 15 mile mark, I was utterly defeated. I was so much pain physically and mentally. I genuinely didn't think I was going to finish. I thought my options were I was either going to collapse, or that there was a bus that came round. So anybody who was going to finish in longer than 6.5 hours, there's a bus coming around and picking them up. And I'm sitting there trying to calculate, because I'd ran for the first 9 miles and I'd gotten a good head start on the bus, and I'm thinking, when's the bus going to come pick me up? I'm trying to figure this out in my head. And I genuinely didn't think I was going to be able to finish. That was just beyond any belief at that point. Every step was agony, absolute agony. And I had my iPod with me, and I plugged in, and I was listening to some Christian music, and a popular song came on, a kind of modern remake of The Lord's My Shepherd, and the chorus is, "And I will trust in you alone, for your endless mercy follows me, and your goodness will lead me home." And at that moment, I was just aware of God's presence, and just him speaking directly to me in that moment, and him saying to me, "I know you don't think you can do it, but keep putting one in front of the other. Just keep trusting me, and I will get you home." And I knew in that instance that he wasn't just talking about that marathon, that moment there. I knew he was talking about the bigger picture in my life at that moment, with the divorce and everything else that was going on. Well, at that point, I was still hoping I was going to salvage my marriage. But I just knew he was talking about it, my whole life at that point. And so it was still agony. I still didn't think I was going to do it, but I was like, okay, God, I will trust you. I'll keep putting one foot in front of the other. For the next 5 miles, I didn't think I was going to finish, but I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, and I just kept going. I trust you, I'll keep plugging away. By the 20 mile mark, it started to dawn on me that I could actually do this. I only had 6 more miles to go, and that last mile was just so good. And when I crossed that finish line in 6 hours and 9 minutes, just the joy was unbelievable. It was such a real, tangible example for me of God keeping his promises. He'd promised, keep putting one foot in front of the other, trust me and I will get you home. And that's what he did. He got me home. He got me across that finish line. And I just knew at that moment that I'd had this urge to do this marathon that I couldn't explain to anybody, and it was because God wanted me to be there. God wanted me to be there physically in that moment, to experience that, so he could have that important chat with me, so that going forward, my husband ended up leaving me for an old school friend of mine, It turns out all this threat about if I was a better person he'd stay with me was nonsense, because he was planning on leaving me anyway. He completely screwed me over financially. It was heartbreaking, it was messy, it was devastating. My whole life that I built up was destroyed overnight. It was, yeah, devastating. But through every step of the way, God met every single one of my needs. I was basically made homeless around about Christmas time, and God provided me with somebody to stay with. Somebody else came forward with a voucher so I could afford to put my all my stuff into storage. My annual bonus came through just in time to be able to put down a deposit on a lovely little house for myself. Everything fell into place. Like every single step along the way. There was at one point I really needed money for solicitor bills, and the church I was going to just gave me some money without, I hadn't asked for it. Somebody just gave me money one day and was like, there was no need to pay it back. I did in the end, when I was able to, but it was every step of the way. God met every single one of my needs, and I was so surrounded by love, by my church, by my friends, by my family. I felt more loved at that time than I had when I was married, and just God loved on me so big and so hard. And then last year at my wedding in Shetland to an amazing man, we sang that same hymn, "The Lord's My Shepherd," at the wedding, because when God told me he was going to bring me home, I didn't for a second believe that he meant home to Shetland. I'm getting emotional now. He did far more than I could ever have imagined or dreamed. He has blessed me beyond measure, in ways that I couldn't have imagined. Back when my world fell apart, he gave me a world that was so much better. So as well as my message from before, I just want to say, if you're going through a really hard time right now, trust God that he does have better things in store for you. I cannot begin to say how much I have been blessed the last few years, and he continues to bless me in ways that I hadn't dared to hope. But in God we can hope, in God we can trust, because he has a plan and he has a promise, and he is faithful to his promises, and his plans are good. And he even can turn the bad things around for our good. He can turn the pain and the heartbreak around for our good. And so that's my Easter message for you this year. And I just wish every blessing, and that you would know God's grace and his love this Easter time, that you would know his promise and his plan, and that you would know him and all his wonderful goodness. So before I make a snotty mess of myself, I'm going to go and just know that you are loved, and you are cherished, and just look after yourselves this Easter. Take care.